Marissa Caldwell hadn't even finished unpacking the last box in her newly renovated home when the knock came. It was late spring, humid and quiet, and the only sound outside was the rhythmic creak of her backyard gate swinging in the breeze. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, smiling at the work she'd waited 3 years to complete, a tall, warm-toned cedar privacy fence enclosing her backyard oasis. It wasn't grand or flashy, just clean lines, natural color, and sturdy panels. She'd hired a licensed contractor, filed a permit with the county, and even paid for her own land survey to ensure the fence set well within her property lines. The contractors finished just 3 days ago, and she was already dreaming of her kids playing in the yard without the eyes of passing dog walkers. But her moment of peace vanished when she opened the mailbox. A thick envelope, hand-delivered and stamped urgent, bore the emblem of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, Marissa's proffered. She tore it open on the porch and scanned the contents. This letter serves as official notice that your recently installed perimeter fence is in violation of Whispering Pines HOA guidelines. The fence was not pre-approved by the HOA Architectural Committee and does not meet design standards. You are hereby fined $200 per day until removal is complete. Her chest tightened. Design standards. There was nothing in the community handbook about specific fence styles. She'd even checked twice before moving forward. Then she saw the name at the bottom, Karen Ellison, HOA president. Everyone in Whispering Pines knew Karen. Tall, rigid posture, silver blonde haircut in a sharp bob, and a gaze that could freeze. A bonfire. She ran the HOA board like a personal fiefdom, citing vague rules to punish homeowners over mailbox colors or flower beds extending 3 inches too far. Still, Marissa never thought she'd be on Karen's radar. She didn't throw loud parties. She cut her grass on schedule. She followed the rules. She paced her kitchen that night, the letter in one hand and the HOA manual in the other. She flipped to the architectural guidelines. Nothing mentioned cedar fences, only a note that perimeter fencing requires HOA awareness and visual harmony with the neighborhood. It was intentionally vague. By morning, Marissa called the HOA office. Voicemail. She left a message, then emailed the address listed on the letter. Hours passed. Nothing. On day 4, another envelope arrived. Second notice. You have now accrued $800 in non-compliance fines. Failure to act within 7 days will initiate legal action and potential lien on your property. Marissa's jaw clenched. She hadn't even gotten a response to her inquiry. Later that afternoon, a neighbor across the street, an older woman named Leslie, walked over and leaned against the fence, nodding in approval. This is beautiful, Marissa. Honestly makes the block look better. Marissa sighed. Tell that to the HOA. They just fined me almost $1,000. Leslie's eyes widened. For this? Are you serious? They didn't fine the Andersons for their metal fence last year. That's what I thought. Marissa said. I had it surveyed. It's completely on my property. Leslie looked around, then lowered her voice. Karen's been itching to flex her power ever since she got re-elected last month. My guess, you're her new example. Marissa stood in silence. Stunned. She looked out at the fence she built for her children's safety, for her family's peace of mind. The idea that a bureaucratic tyrant could weaponize fine print to threaten her home felt surreal. But it was happening. By nightfall, Marissa wasn't angry. She was resolved. She reopened her laptop and found her original survey documents, pulled up HOA emails, and started drafting her first formal response. The subject line read, Official dispute of HOA fine, property line compliance attached. She wasn't going to let Karen bully her with fear and fines. But she had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go, or how much Karen was willing to risk to maintain control. The countdown had begun. By Monday morning, Marissa had printed everything she could find: county permits, land survey reports, email exchanges, and even screenshots of the HOA's digital handbook. She bundled them into a binder labeled HOA dispute and placed it on the passenger seat of her car. She was headed to the Whispering Pines HOA board meeting. It was held in the back room of the local library, a cramped space with mismatched chairs and a faint smell of stale coffee. The monthly meetings were usually attended by 5 or 6 people, mostly retirees with time to spare. But tonight, nearly 24 showed up. Word had spread about the fence fine. Some were just curious. Others had quiet complaints of their own. Karen Ellison sat at the head of the table like a judge about to hand down a sentence. Her pearl necklace caught the fluorescent lights as she straightened her notes. She didn't acknowledge Marissa when she walked in. The meeting opened with routine business, landscaping bids, a motion about dog waste stations, and a short debate over paint color approvals. Then Karen cleared her throat. Next item, architectural violation at 1529 Maple Bend Drive. Marissa stood, took a steady breath, and stepped forward. That's my property, she said calmly. And I'm here to address that violation. Karen raised an eyebrow. You were notified in writing that your fence was not pre-approved. I was never told that I needed approval for a fence if it was within my property line and met city code. Marissa replied. She opened her binder and held up a copy of the original HOA handbook. There is no rule in here requiring pre-approval for fences unless they deviate from neighborhood standards. My fence is cedar, just like 3 others on my street. Karen didn't look at the document. We updated the rules last fall. Marissa flipped to a printed screenshot. This is the latest digital version on the horror website dated 2 weeks ago. Still no mention of a required pre-approval. And even if that were the case, the fence doesn't violate any design elements. One of the board members, a tall, bespectacled man named David, leaned forward. Do we have any record that her fence require a variance or special approval? Karen pursed her lips. The issue isn't just the style. The fence encroaches on HOA-maintained common space. It's not entirely on her lot. Marissa calmly pulled out a second document. This is a land survey I paid for before construction began. It shows my exact property line. The fence is 2 feet within it. I also had a county inspector verify it during installation. She handed the paper to David, who scanned it and passed it down the table. Karen didn't reach for it. I'm sorry, but you don't get to redefine property boundaries. Marissa continued. You can't fine someone $100 a day over something that isn't even against your own rules. Karen's voice took on a sharp edge. We have the authority to enforce harmony in the neighborhood. This is about process. You ignored it. David spoke again, softer this time. But if the rule wasn't clearly written, and the fence is on her property, Karen cut him off. The board will now vote on whether the violation and associated fines stand. There was an awkward pause. Then hands went up, 3 for keeping the fine, 2 against. Karen smiled tightly. Motion carries. Marissa stared at them. You're ignoring documented proof. Karen didn't respond. She simply moved on to the next agenda item. Back at home, Marissa sat in her car in the driveway for a long moment before going inside. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. This wasn't about a fence anymore. It was about power, control, and a president willing to twist truth to win. The next morning, she ordered a second, independent survey. She was going to stack proof as high as they stack fines. And when she returned to her inbox, a new email waited from the HOA. As of today, your fine total is $1,000. Failure to comply will result in a lien filing. She closed the laptop. Then she picked up her phone and started dialing attorneys. Marissa didn't sleep much that night. She lay awake replaying every word from the HOA meeting, every smug glance Karen cast as the vote passed. Her backyard, the one she worked so hard to secure for her kids, now felt like a battlefield. But this fight wasn't going to be won by emotion. It would be won by proof. The next morning, the second land surveyor arrived with a tripod and laser tools. Marissa stood on the porch, arms crossed, as he walked the property line. After an hour of precise measurements and digital mapping, he nodded. Your fence is within the boundary, by about 20 inches all the way down. He confirmed. No encroachment, Whoever's claiming otherwise is bluffing or lying. She got the report notarized within 2 hours. Then, she logged into the Whispering Pines community Facebook group and uploaded both surveys side by side, first and second opinions, both identical. She added a short caption, "Hoa fined me $1,000 for fancifully inside my property. To certified surveys prove they're wrong. I won't be bullied." Within minutes, the comments exploded. Some neighbors posted in solidarity, sharing their own small run-ins with Karens over rich trash bins cited holiday lights deemed disruptive. One woman even claimed Karen had demanded her tomato plants be formally landscaped. But not everyone dared to speak up. A few residents sent private messages instead. "Be careful, she'll make it personal. She once threatened to flag my mortgage company if I didn't repaint my shutters." Karen Hezer. "Friend, at the title office, watch out for liens," Marissa replied with polite thanks. But the anxiety crept in. Could Karen really go that far? The answer came on Thursday, when a certified letter arrived in a thick, official-looking envelope. The letterhead read, "Whispering Pines Legal Counsel. Due to continued non-compliance and lack of Hoa approval, fines have now reached $2,800, pursuant to Section 9 of the Community Charter. The board will initiate a property lien in 14 calendar days." She dropped the letter onto the kitchen counter like it burned. A lien could affect her credit, delay refinancing, even trigger alerts with her mortgage lender. All over a fence. No, she wasn't letting it happen. Marissa's next move was decisive. She retained a real estate attorney, Mr. Alan Pierce, who'd handled HOA overreach cases before. He was calm, gray-haired, and unshaken by Karen's tactics. "She's bluffing," he said after reviewing the documents. "But she's counting on you folding because the pressure looks official." He drafted a cease and desist letter to the Hoa and demanded immediate withdrawal of the fine and lien notice, citing both surveys, due process violations, and the lack of documented vote before fines were issued. He also included screenshots of the Hoa handbook, pointing out that no amendment requiring fence approval had been filed legally. Karen didn't back down. Instead, she emailed a personal letter to Marissa and copied the entire Hoa board. "Ms. Caldwell, your behavior and online conduct are divisive to the harmony of our community. Your recent posts have encouraged hostility and threatened HOA authority. You may be subject to further sanctions under our conduct policy." It wasn't just about the fence anymore. Marissa's attorney smirked. "She just gave us more fuel. She's threatening sanctions for exercising your First Amendment rights." The next day, Marissa and Alan filed a formal dispute with the county zoning board and sent a letter to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, flagging the HOA's actions as potential abuse of power. Karen responded by accusing Marissa of forging the surveys. The escalation was wild, almost unbelievable, but every step was real. Every threat was printed and mailed. Every email carefully worded to walk a legal line. Karen was trying to crush her, one penalty at a time. But Marissa had something Karen didn't: the truth, the law, and growing support. And soon, Karen would find out this wasn't going to end the way she expected. Because Marissa wasn't the only one who'd kept her courts. The neighborhood was watching now, and so was someone on the board. The following weekend, Marissa found herself sitting across from a woman named Trina Holt at a small cafe just a mile outside of Whispering Pines. Trina was a former Hoa board member who resigned the year before under circumstances no one had fully explained. She had messaged Marissa after seeing her Facebook post. "You've kicked the beehive," Trina said, stirring her coffee. "But I'm glad someone finally did." Marissa leaned in. "What really happened between you and Karen?" Trina gave a tight smile. "Let's just say she doesn't like being challenged, and she's good at making sure those who do end up isolated, silenced, or fined into submission." According to Trina, Karen had built her power not by following rules but by interpreting them in whatever way best suited her. Years earlier, she accused a neighbor of unauthorized landscaping because his roses didn't match the HOA's seasonal flower recommendation. When he refused to comply, Karen threatened to contact his mortgage lender about a violation clause. He sold his home 6 months later. She files just enough paperwork to make it look legitimate, Trina explained, but half of it never goes through proper channels. She counts on people not knowing their rights. That hit home. Marissa realized Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was manufacturing authority and using it to control people who wouldn't. Pushback, Trina slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were printouts, old home meeting notes, email chains, and 3 formal homeowner complaints all tied to Karen. 2 were ignored. 1 mysteriously vanished from public records a month after it was filed. "Why are you showing me this now?" Marissa asked. "Because she's overreached this time," Trina said, "and because you didn't back down. That scares her more than anything." Back home, Marissa flipped through the documents late into the night. Several pieces stood out, especially old meeting agenda that listed Karen's own fences, approved via expedited process. It was the same cedar style as Marissa's, but there was no record of any vote. So Karen had built a similar fence. She just didn't find herself. The next morning, Marissa compiled her findings and posted another update to the community Facebook group. She included scans of Karen's fence photo from a past newsletter and highlighted the missing board. Vote. She ended the post with one question. If the Hoa president's cedar fence was approved without a vote, why was mine targeted? The neighborhood lit up. Comments poured in. Dozens of homeowners tagged each other. A few defended Karen, but most demanded answers. That afternoon, Karen sent out a community-wide email, attempting damage control in light of recent confusion regarding community architectural standards. The board will be reviewing all prior approvals and enforcement actions to ensure fairness and consistency. But it wasn't an apology, and it didn't retract Marissa's fines. Instead, Karen filed a formal complaint with the city's code enforcement department, claiming Marissa's fence created a sightline hazard near the corner lot. If approved, the city would conduct an inspection, and Marissa might be forced to remove it regardless of her property line. A knock came 2 days later. A city inspector stood on her lawn. Clipboard in hand, Marissa greeted him, weary but polite. He walked the fence perimeter, checking angles, measuring visibility from the sidewalk and driveway. After 20 minutes, he shook his head. "No sightline issues here," he said. "This fence is legal. Whoever reported this doesn't know the city codes." He left with a smile and a promise to mark the complaint as resolved. But Marissa had had enough. She emailed the Hoa board directly, copying the city's findings, the surveys, the legal notices, and the new evidence about Karen's own fence. She gave them an ultimatum: rescind the fines, remove the lien threat, or I'll take this public. She expected silence. But what came next was worse. Another certified letter, this time warning that Marissa's ongoing defamation of HOA leadership may result in personal civil action. Karen had shifted the battle again. Now it wasn't just homeowner versus Hoa, it was Marissa versus Karen. And the gloves were off. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, thicker than the others, stamped with the words "legal notice" enclosed. Marissa opened it carefully. Inside was the inevitable next step in Karen's campaigner formal notice: the Whispering Pines. Hoa was proceeding with a lien and taking the matter to court. The court date was set for 3 weeks from Monday. Marissa stared at the paperwork in silence. Across the kitchen table, her 2 kids quietly ate their cereal, unaware that their backyard play area was now the subject of a legal war. She slid the documents toward her lawyer, Alan Pierce, who read them with his usual calm demeanor. Then, he looked up and said, "They're bluffing. But we can't ignore it. This just became very public." Alan explained that while the Hoa could threaten a lien, they still had to prove that a violation existed and that the fines were legal. But Karen was counting on the weight of the court system to intimidate. Marissa's instinct was to stay quiet. But Alan had a different plan. "We go on offense," he said, file an injunction to block the lien, and bring the fight into the light. By that evening, Allen had filed a motion to pause all enforcement actions until the dispute could be reviewed. It would buy time and, more importantly, give Marissa a chance to expose the truth. Meanwhile, the story was spreading. A local TV station, tipped off by the growing online buzz, reached out for an interview. At first, Marissa hesitated, worried about the spotlight, but Allen encouraged it. If they want to fight this in public, he said, let them face public scrutiny. 2 days later, a news van pulled up to her driveway. The segment aired that night footage of her children's swing set, the pristine cedar fence, and Marissa calmly explaining how she followed every rule only to be punished by a president. Drunk on power, across town, Karen saw the broadcast too, and she did not take it well. The next morning, Karen emailed the Hoa board, "We are facing a coordinated campaign to undermine the HOAS authority. I recommend issuing a temporary communication freeze and focusing on legal resolution. Undermining board leadership will erode our community's standards." But the damage was done. Marissa's inbox filled with messages from residents, some apologizing for not speaking up earlier, others quietly asking for her lawyer's name. A few even admitted they'd paid similar fines just to avoid conflict. Then came the surprise. David Lanning, the board member who had quietly opposed Karen during the first meeting, reached out and asked to meet. They sat down at a public park, away from the Hoa clubhouse. "I've been on the board for 2 years," David said, "and this is the 3rd time Karen's tried to push a lien without a full board vote." Marissa's eyes narrowed. "That's illegal, isn't it?" David nodded. "Technically, every fine has to be voted on and documented. But she's good at avoiding that. Calls people one-on-one. Pressures them privately." He slid a folder across the picnic table. Inside were printed emails, some from Karen, others from board members, none of them officially documented in meeting minutes. One line stood out. "Let's just push it through. She won't take it to court." Karen had gambled that Marissa would fold. But now, with a court date looming, a growing neighborhood movement, and internal board dissent, that gamble was backfiring. With less than 2 weeks until trial, Marissa and Allen doubled down. They collected sworn statements from the surveyors. They printed city inspection reports. They organized photographs of every other fence in the neighborhood, including Karen's, and they subpoenaed Hoa meeting records going back 5 years. But the biggest breakthrough came when Allen noticed something odd. Buried in the HOAS charter was a clause requiring any legal fine to be accompanied by a written and recorded vote of the full board. No such vote had taken place. That wasn't just a technicality, it was grounds for dismissal of the entire case. Karen, however, seemed unaware. She filed yet another complaint, this time accusing Marissa of inciting unrest and violating Hoa neighbor conduct expectations. But the courtroom clock was ticking. And Karen had no idea what was waiting for her in court, or who else was ready to speak. The pressure inside Whispering Pines was reaching a breaking point. With the court date less than 10 days away, residents were no longer whispering their discontent, they were posting it. One neighbor after another began sharing stories of quiet fines, veiled threats, and unexplained rule violations that felt more like personal vendettas than community governance. And it all pointed to one name, Karen Ellison. The tipping point came when a small local news outlet published a follow-up on Marissa's fence case. But this time, the focus wasn't just on her. It was on the Hoa board itself and the members who enabled Karen's power. In the article, board member David Lanning finally broke ranks. There's been a pattern of unilateral decisions, documents being altered after meetings, and a complete lack of transparency. "I can't be part of it anymore," he told the reporter. The quote rocked the community. Within 48 hours, 2 more board members, Linda Voss and Peter Tran, announced their resignations via an open letter shared with the entire neighborhood email list. They cited a toxic leadership environment and admitted that multiple fines issued under Karen's tenure had never gone through formal board votes. Residents flooded the Hoa office with emails and calls, a petition to hold a vote of no confidence. and Karen gathered over 200 signatures, nearly half the neighborhood. The once untouchable president now faced real consequences, and yet, Karen wasn't backing down. She released a carefully worded statement via the Homeowner mailing list. "We live in a time where misinformation spreads easily, and board leadership is often misunderstood. I've done everything in my power to protect the harmony of Whispering Pines. If some cannot respect that, I stand prepared to defend our standards in court." But even her most loyal supporters were starting to go quiet. That week, the Horror Board scheduled an emergency meeting. Marissa attended not as a defendant, but as a concerned homeowner. She sat quietly in the back as the room filled beyond capacity. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder, most of them holding printed versions of the no confidence petition. Karen entered late, flanked by the HOAS legal counsel. Her expression was tight, guarded, but she tried to speak with the same authority she always had. "Let's begin by reaffirming our dedication to neighborhood order," she said. A voice interrupted her, this time not from the crowd, but from within the board. David stood up and held out a printed page. "Before we continue, I'd like to submit a motion to suspend all pending fines and enforcement actions related to 1529 Maple Bend Drive until a full investigation is completed." Karen's lips tightened. "That's not on the agenda. It is now," David replied, "and I'm not the only one backing it." The remaining board members, those who hadn't resigned, nodded. A vote was held, and for the first time in months, the board overruled Karen. The crowd burst into quiet applause. Karen tried to move to the next agenda item, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air was heavy, tense, not with fear, but resolve. Marissa left the meeting feeling something new, momentum. But the following morning, another letter landed in her mailbox, this time not from the Hoer, but from a law firm representing Karen personally. The letter accused Marissa of damaging the reputation of a public official, citing her Facebook posts, news interviews, and statements made in community meetings. It threatened civil action for defamation if she continued spreading malicious and misleading information. Marissa held the letter in her hands, stunned and real. She muttered. Her attorney Alan wasn't surprised. "This isn't about HOA policy anymore. Karen's trying to make this personal, but this could work in our favor. Judges don't like it when public officials use legal threats to silence criticism." Alan filed a counter notice and added the new letter to the growing pile of evidence that now included altered HOA documents, misused fines, lack of votes, and legal overreach. Then, just 3 days before the court hearing, an anonymous envelope was slid under Marissa's front door. No return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. "Check Article 4, Section 12 of the HOA Charter. You'll find what you need." She stared at the line for a moment before flipping through her files. When she found the article, her breath caught in her throat. There it was. Any enforcement action involving fines exceeding $1,000 must be preceded by a full board vote, recorded in public minutes, and confirmed by written notice to the homeowner prior to enforcement. None of that had happened. Karen hadn't just overstepped, she'd violated the HOA's own charter. The final nail was ready, and Marissa was about to drive it in publicly, legally, and with the full force of truth behind her. The courtroom was packed for a neighborhood dispute. Whispering Pines residents filled the back rows, some standing, some holding folded HOA notices like receipts of silent protest. News crews lined the hallway, ready to capture what had become a viral standoff between one woman and an entire association. But for Marissa, this wasn't about headlines, it was about reclaiming her name, her home, and her dignity. Karen Ellison sat at the plaintiff's table, lips pursed, wearing a tailored navy suit and a confidence she no longer truly owned. Her attorney shuffled papers with a mechanical calm, but even he looked uneasy. This wasn't unfolding the way they had planned. Marissa sat beside her lawyer, Alan Pierce, clutching a manila folder labeled charter violations. It contained every piece of evidence they had gathered, every ignored vote, every conflicting statement, every missing document, and the single paragraph that could unravel Karen's entire case. The judge, a stern but fair-looking woman named Judge Crawford, called the session to order. Today, we hear the case of Whispering Pines Homeowners Association versus Marissa Caldwell regarding non-compliance and accrued fines. Counsel, proceed. Karen's attorney was first. He stood and launched into his argument with rehearsed precision. The defendant erected a structure without proper HOA approval. The board, acting in accordance with its charter, issued fines. Ms. Caldwell chose to defy these measures and disrupt neighborhood governance. He handed over a packet of correspondence and HOA documentation. When it was Alan's turn, he stood slowly, almost casually, and approached the bench with quiet confidence. Your Honor, we intend to prove not only that my client acted within her legal property rights, but that the HOA, under the direction of Ms. Ellison, violated its own governing documents in issuing these fines. He opened the folder and laid out the facts one by one. First came the 2 certified land surveys, both showing the fence firmly inside Marissa's property lines. Then the city inspection report dismissing Karen's sightline hazard claim. Then, the missing meeting minutes. Alan walked the court through how fines exceeding $1,000 require full board vote publicly recorded and communicated in writing prior to enforcement. He held up the charter, tapped his finger at Article 4, Section 12, and said firmly, that vote never happened, and if it did, there's no record of it. That makes the fines, every single dollar of them, legally unenforceable, the courtroom murmured. Karen's attorney objected, claiming the board held a consensus via email. But Alan fired back. The HOA's own rules demand an official meeting and public record. Private emails don't cut it. Judge Crawford leaned forward. Do you have documentation of that vote, counselor? Karen's lawyer flipped through his binder, then whispered something inaudible to Karen. She didn't respond. Her face had hardened into a blank expression. The judge continued, do you have any evidence that the defendant was notified of a board vote prior to the fine escalation? Silence. No, Your Honor. The attorney finally muttered. Alan moved in for the final blow. We also have testimony and resignations from multiple board members who state under oath that no such vote was ever held. Further, we have evidence that Ms. Ellison acted outside the board's authority to pursue a lien against my client's home move that, if successful, could have affected her mortgage, her credit, and her future. Marissa could feel every eye in the room on her. Then Alan dropped the last envelope onto the judge's bench. Inside were copies of Karen's fence approval from 2 years ago. Same cedar panels, same height, and no record of board approval. Your Honor, if this fence was acceptable for the HOA president, why isn't it acceptable for my client? That question hung in the air like ATHUNDRCLAP. Judge Crawford took a long pause. Then, with a firm voice, she spoke. I am dismissing all fines issued by the Whispering Pines HOA against Ms. Caldwell. The lien notice is hereby nullified. I will also be referring this case to the State HOA Oversight Committee for further review of potential charter violations and abuse of authority. Gasps filled the courtroom. Karen's jaw clenched. But she didn't speak. Her attorney quietly gathered his things, knowing the war had been lost. As Marissa stepped outside, microphones were already waiting. She simply held up her folder and said, I followed every rule. All I ever wanted was fairness. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that a formal complaint had already been filed by David Lanning with the county district attorney, alleging document falsification and abuse of nonprofit authority. Karen's legal trouble was only just beginning. 2 weeks after the court ruling, the mood in Whispering Pines had shifted. Where once neighbors avoided each other behind manicured hedges and whispered about Karen's power, now front doors were open. Conversations flourished, and residents were no longer afraid to speak up. Marissa walked through her backyard, her hand brushing against the cedar fence that started it all. Her kids were laughing again, chasing their golden retriever through the grass. their joy no longer shadowed by uncertainty. But while Marissa had found peace, Karen Ellison's world was unraveling. The morning after the ruling, an anonymous packet was delivered to the county district attorney's office. Inside were altered her meeting minutes, versions of the charter with unexplained revisions, and metadata proving timestamps had been changed, documents that appeared to have been edited weeks after the meetings they allegedly recorded. The source, David Lanning, tired of the deception and emboldened by the public outcry, David had compiled the evidence during his final days on the board. He wasn't just protecting Marissa anymore, he was trying to save the neighborhood from years of unchecked power. The district attorney's office opened an inquiry. Karen was summoned for questioning, along with two of her closest allies from the former board. The allegations: falsification of governance documents, misuse of HOA funds, and unlawful threats of property liens. News of the investigation rippled through the neighborhood. Karen stopped attending meetings. Her usual weekly email digest became sporadic, then vanished altogether. Residents began posting photos of the HOA clubhouse's locked door with the caption, "Where's Karen now?" A month later, the HOA held a special election. Over 300 residents turned out, an unprecedented number. Marissa didn't run, but she stood near the voting table, chatting with neighbors, offering them coffee and encouraging them to choose someone who would listen and lead, not controlled by unanimous vote. The community elected longtime resident and retired teacher Sheila Brennan as the new president. Her first order of business: a public apology. In front of a crowd gathered on the clubhouse lawn, Sheila spoke plainly. "We failed one of our own. We allowed rules to be weaponized. That ends today." The crowd applauded. Some even cheered. Sheila went on to announce the formation of a community oversight committee, an independent group of residents who would review all future enforcement actions. Transparency would no longer be optional. As for Karen, the consequences were real. Facing mounting legal pressure, she stepped down from her position. Soon after, she sold her home quietly and left Whispering Pines. Rumor had it she moved to counties away, trying to escape the scrutiny. But the district attorney's office continued its investigation. Civil penalties were still on the table and potential criminal charges weren't off the list. Meanwhile, Marissa returned to her life different, stronger, and more connected than ever to her community. She'd gone toe-to-toe with a system designed to silence her and had emerged with her name cleared, her rights intact, and her neighborhood transformed. She received a handwritten note from an elderly neighbor named Mr. Hall, who had lived in Whispering Pines since it was first built. "Thank you for reminding us that this neighborhood belongs to its people, not to fear, not to power, but to principle." The fence still stood, untouched, not just a barrier of wood, but a monument to resistance, a line Karen tried to cross, and one Marissa refused to surrender. Late one evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and cast golden shadows across her backyard, Marissa sat on her porch with a cup of tea in hand. She wasn't thinking about court dates or fines or chitters. She was watching her kids run along the fence line, free and safe. And for the first time in months, there were no letters in the mailbox, no threats, no battles left to fight. Justice had come, and so had peace.